Hello, and we are live.
As I see, we've got a couple of people joining us so far. Hello, John and Travis. And I see we have a few others joining the room as well right now. My name is Zoe, and this is a discussion about the events that transpired on January 6th, 2021. And the episode is called The Jan 6th Coup, Threat to Democracy. So, the reason I decided to title this episode The January 6th Coup is because the definition of coup is a sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government. And I know a lot of people are going to take some issues with that, with the use of the word coup in describing the events that transpired on January 6th. So I see we still have some people coming into the room now. Thank you all for being here. It's good to have you here tonight. We're talking about January 6th, the events that transpired over a year ago. And I was going to just again repeat here the definition of a coup, which is a sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government. That's one definition of it. So not everyone's going to agree with that, and that's okay. Everyone's going to have their chance to come in and give your voice and have your opinions heard tonight. So I just want to start out with discussing a few things about that day and going over some of the events that transpired. And then we'll go ahead and take some callers and get into some discussions about it. So I think it's fair to use the word coup personally. I don't think obviously not everyone agrees with that, because we did have a situation where we had a large group that was somewhat coordinated, certainly somewhat coordinated, that breached the Capitol grounds illegally. They fought with police officers and they broke through several barricades. They fought with, they broke through several doors and windows. They smashed and destroyed property. And what their aims were, of course, is not going to be the same for every single individual that was there that day. But I think that it's pretty clear that overall the goal was to stop the overall overriding goal, the general goal there was to stop a legal transfer of power, a democratic transfer of power. Now, doing something like that is pretty important. If you're going to by stopping a transfer of power, I see that very much the same as overthrowing the system of government in a big way, because that's an important democratic norm. And if you're going to stop if you're going to stop an election, and in that, if you're going to override an election result and stop the reading of the vote count and stop that election's results from being authorized and implemented into law, then that is basically the same thing as seizing power from that government and from that rightful leader who was elected, and giving that power to another leader who was not lawfully duly elected. So that is why I like to go ahead and call it a coup, and I feel comfortable using that, and I think that it's fair. So I'm going to go ahead and explain to you something else here. Many minimize the January 6th violence, and I have a problem with that. And I would like to go ahead and read something here that I got from an episode of Making Sense with Sam Harris. And I want to go ahead in just a minute here, and I will, before the end of this show, I'm going to link this episode in the comments section so you can go ahead and see that. But I would like to go ahead and just read a quote from that show in order to give us something to think about to get started with our discussion here. So this was this episode is of Making Sense with Sam Harris is number 230, An Insurrection of Lies. Everything is so good in this episode that I didn't know what to quote. I picked a couple of my favorite quotes from the episode to read aloud, but I encourage everyone to go and listen to this episode, which I linked in the show description, because this is such an important topic. And Sam talks about it so eloquently, while also explaining why the media and the left's treatment of the Black Lives Matter protests and riots the summer prior, such as minimizing real harms caused to businesses that were looted, did not help in creating an atmosphere of contempt and anger toward the left. And it helped spurn claims of hypocrisy. I want to be clear, though, and this is something else Sam Harris mentions as well. There's no legitimate comparison between Black Lives Matter protests and the January 6th insurrection. Black Lives Matter protests caused some damage and destruction, but they were not at any point a threat to democratic norms or to the sovereignty of our state or federal governments. So I'm going to go ahead and read this quote here from Sam Harris. And again, this is episode number 230, called An Insurrection of Lies. Quote, "This was an insurrection incited by the sitting president of the United States." End quote. He continues, "But consider that people who attacked the Capitol fought with cops. They really fought with cops. They weren't all just let in and risked their lives to get into that building. One cop is dead, and one insurrectionist is dead, having been shot in the neck by police. And there was no telling what that mob would do once it got inside those buildings. They were not looting a shopping mall. They were storming the halls of Congress at the direct encouragement of the President of the United States, who had convinced them over the course of months that their democracy had literally been stolen from them." End quote. He goes on to say, quote, "He set them loose on the Capitol that very morning, saying he would be with them. If you don't see a difference between that and a Black Lives Matter protest that devolves into looting and arson, take a moment and try. There is no analogy to be drawn here." So that is the end of that quotation. And I do want to go ahead and read through a brief timeline of the events that transpired on the day of January 6th. So, excuse me, the attack, at 12 p.m. that day, there was a rally, and President Trump addressed his supporters. And during that rally, one of the quotes he said was, "We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." So you can see how this is really a very intense kind of rhetoric right outside the Capitol building. He also, quote, said, "We will never give up. We will never concede." He called on the Vice President Mike Pence, as president of the Senate, to reject Biden's win. He told his supporters, quote, "I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election." And then again, he said at some point, "All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify, and we become president, and you are the happiest of people." And then later on, he says about Mike Pence that, quote, "I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country." And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you, unquote. So I want to mention that Mike Pence, about the same time, released a letter saying that his role in the electoral in the certification of the electoral votes was largely ceremonial. And, quote, my oath to support and defend the Constitution constrains me from claiming unilateral authority to determine which electoral votes should be counted and which should not. And around 1 o'clock is when the initial wave of protesters stormed the outer police barrier around the Capitol. At 1:05, Nancy Pelosi called the joint session of Congress to order. And around this time, Trump ended his speech and he said, we are going to the Capitol. He said, quote, we are going to try and give them, referring to the Republicans, the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country, unquote. At 1:30 p.m., protesters overcame the police who were forced back into the building. Shortly after 2 p.m., protesters broke windows and climbed into the Capitol. They opened doors for others to follow. The Secret Service agents whisked Mike Pence off the Senate floor. At 2:20 p.m., the Senate is called to recess and the building went into lockdown. At 2:44 p.m., Ashley Babbitt was killed as she attempted to climb through a smashed window in the door where several members of Congress had been in a, I want to say hiding, had been inside while they were being evacuated, and she climbed through a smashed window and at a door that had been barricaded. Police officers were inside trying to protect the fleeing congressmen who they were trying to evacuate. That was 2:44 p.m. At 3:11 p.m., you had Representative Mike Gallagher, who's a Republican, getting on Twitter and saying, Mr. President, you've got to stop this. You're the only person who can call this off. Okay, and then at 3:36 p.m., this was more than 2 hours after protesters first breached the Capitol grounds. The White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, tweets that Trump has ordered the National Guard to the Capitol. And at 4:17 p.m., Trump tweets a video. 4:17 p.m., he tweets a video, and the video says, I know your pain, I know you're hurt. These are some of the things he says in this video. Quote, you're very special. You've seen what happens. You've seen the way others are treated. Quote, I know how you feel, but go home and go in peace, unquote. And I want to point out, I missed this earlier in the timeline, that I believe it was a couple hours earlier. The first time Trump had tweeted something earlier. Okay, 2:24 p.m. So you see, this was still in the middle of these attacks. At 2:24 p.m., Trump tweeted, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, unquote. So he's tweeting that at 2:24 p.m. in the middle of all of these attacks that are going on, by the way. But let's go back to, I missed that part before. Let's go back to 4:17 p.m. is when he asked everybody to go home on Twitter. And about shortly before 6 p.m., almost 5 hours after the rioting began, the police started to clear the Capitol and eventually secure the interior. At 6:01 p.m., Trump tweets again. He tweets, some of the things that he tweets here are, quote, these are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. Unquote. So it's hard to believe that after the events of that day, instead of feeling that something expressing that something truly awful had happened on that day, he wants people to remember it as some sort of a glorious day instead, which is really unfortunate, I think, and really the wrong message and the wrong tone to set as the president of the United States. So then at 8 p.m., Pence reopens the Senate, and they go on to certify the election results that evening. And those are that is a basic timeline of the day. So we have been, the way I see this is that it's really unfortunate that he had so many opportunities where he could have said something and called for action with the National Guard to come in and do something. He could have gotten on TV and asked people to go home. I feel like he really failed to take the actions they should have taken that day. But so I think it's really important that be acknowledged and discussed, because it's really a failure, such a deep, important failure that we shouldn't accept in this country. We shouldn't accept that kind of intense failure of leadership, an intense failure to really uphold the democratic norms of our country. And it was all based on false information. He didn't win the election. Again, I know that's something else that we can disagree, that people can disagree about. I don't think rightly so, but everybody is entitled to their point of view. But he did not win the election by any evidence. There's no strong evidence indicating that he actually won that election. And we've all been taking this functional democracy for granted for a long time. It's hard to believe that this could happen. We have been complacent. Donald Trump eroded democratic norms of society, guardrails of democracy, and he is actively trying to continue eroding this system. People who should be checking him, the Republican National Committee, are participating go along with this sort of thing. Would you have certified the election results? This should be a litmus test for fitness to serve in office. I mean, the only reason not to do such a thing would be direct, overwhelming evidence of fraud. And it was very clear that they didn't have that. So at least Mike Pence had a modicum of integrity here. I mean, thank goodness that we had Mike Pence in that position that day. Thank goodness that he had the integrity to stand up to this. To this rhetoric from the president. We're all deeply fortunate that Mike President was vice president on that day. Trump had a responsibility that day to choose his words carefully, and he did not. He had a large crowd, a very, very large crowd there, and he could have called for people to leave much earlier. He could have called for the National Guard to move out much earlier. And you don't have to have the authority to ask for something like this to be done. Anybody can request something like this, can make a request. He could have easily requested it to be done. Although I don't see why he wouldn't have had the authority to do it. I haven't seen anything that specifically says that. So I am going to, if anybody would like to go ahead and call in, I would like to hear some other people give their take about this, and we can get into a discussion. If anybody does have any other opinions on the subject, or some other perspectives here, or some other takes that they would like to share, feel free to go ahead and jump in that caller queue, and we can go ahead and get started taking some calls here. I'm going to refresh my page now and see if I can go ahead and take. It looks like I do have a caller here. And it is John. You are on, John, I think. Hello? Can you hear me? That's weird. I went to let him in and then he immediately seemed to go back down to the listeners, even though I went ahead and I thought I selected. Hmm. I do see Mace there now. I do. Okay, I will take Mace then. Hello, Mace.
Yeah, you don't have to
That,
click us. Yeah, you don't have to click us. Uh, we go on. Yeah, we go on the caller automatic.
hmm. Um, oh, sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like if you
I
want to take.
what I
Yeah,
selected was take caller, so I guess I don't know. I'm sorry about
and
that, everyone.
that's when you hit. Yeah, when you hit take caller, it shuffles to the next one. Not there's already someone in the on deck circle there. Like you see, like there's a
Oh,
little
yeah.
line, and the person on the
I
left of the
yeah,
line is already in the callers, and the person on the right is the on deck. And if you hit take caller, then it takes the guy that's on deck and kicks the person that's in the batter's box essentially.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay, so I apologize to everyone I kicked out. All right, so since I have you now, Doolittle, would you like to go
Yeah,
ahead?
sure.
I don't know if that's
Yeah, I mean,
fair,
I'm a
but
little bit.
it
Yeah,
might be
I'm.
the easiest way to move
Yeah, I don't
things
know.
along here.
Fair. I don't know. I don't know about fair being relevant in this conversation. Um, yeah, I think your characterization of the events as a coup um, is a gross mischaracterization of what went on. I was one of the people that was there in the at the time, and I can tell you that the instructions that people received were to leave your weapons in Virginia, and there was something my estimation was about 100,000 people were there in Washington D.C. By my estimation of the crowds, and there's other people that I talked to that if you listen to what Bill Roy said, he thought there was between 1 and 2 million. And I thought it was between 1 and 200,000. And if you listen to CNN, it was between 10 and 20,000. And which of those number counts you believe um, is really important for how you um, categorize the level of violence that occurred. And like let's just say, for example, if you believe the 10,000 and 700 out of 10,000 got arrested, that's a pretty that's a pretty high number for a peaceful gathering. Um, if you look at the number out of 100,000, 700 people eventually getting arrested is my thing keeps saying check your internet connection, and I've got a really great internet connection, so I don't know if there's a problem with the server, but I'm gonna keep talking. Just let me know. Yeah, just let me know if there's a problem. But if you believe there was 100,000 people and two people died in a day out of 100,000, well, okay, well, so two people were. I guess there was a police officer that died um, after the fact, and an individual from the rioters that died from getting shot, and then there were two other people that died of relatively natural causes that were not related to violence. If you look at two per 100,000 in a day, and you just I'll let you do the math on that one, but if you convert that into a life expectancy, um, I don't know. Can I get I don't know. Can I get someone with a calculator? What's the life expectancy of years? Two people out of 100,000 days. So I mean, it's basically your life expectancy there is 50,000 days. Okay, so let's divide that by 365. So the life expectancy of uh, of a person who was at that protest, be them police or protesters, is 136 years. So you're on average twice as safe at that protest as you were just in ordinary life in America. So
Hmm.
I think characterizing it as a violent event, given my 100,000 count, is a gross mischaracterization. And And if you use villains count, then you're essentially 20 times more safe at that protest than you would have been just in ordinary life in America. So that would be like calling, from villain's perspective, because he thought there was 2 million people there. That would be like a super gross miscarriage. I don't know how you would even. I don't even know how anyone could be that wrong to call it violent when 2 people died out of 2 million in a day's event. Um, so if you there's a problem because that a lot of people have because they watch the news, and the news is super anti-Trump. And so if there's anything that goes badly, they're going to highlight that, and you have a bias because you can only perceive things that have been shown to you. And if you weren't there, and the only thing you're seeing is what you saw in the news, then you're going to see the things that they're intentionally highlighting to try to persuade you in in the whatever political direction they're trying to pull you. And if you believe the 100,000 number, um, you should take a step back and say, oh, maybe it wasn't violent because there's not really any place with 100,000 people in it where only 2 people die, whether it's by shooting or by natural causes or by other means. Like if you go to a city of 100,000, if only 2 people die of violent means, then it's certainly less violent than the average city in America. So, I think that's a recalibration that you probably need to do a little bit, and another recalibration is your claim that there wasn't a peaceful transfer of power, and I think that maybe you just haven't really been educated on the political process of what it takes to be elected and what are all the steps that that lawyers and congressmen and state senators go through to certify an election. And there was, quite clearly, there was a legal and highly constitutional and law abiding plan set out by Trump's lawyers, including Giuliani, which includes fighting up to the last minute where fighting is allowed. And the last minute was January 6th when the electoral votes get counted. And and there's a legal due process for counting the electoral votes, which includes, well, first of all, there's an election, right? And then the states have to certify that the election was valid, and then the electoral votes get passed on to Congress, and then the vice president counts the electoral votes, and he has 2 different boxes that he has to count the votes out of, and there's one set of boxes, and then often there's a set of dueling electors that are submitted by the state legislatures, and the vice president has to use his discretion whether to count those dueling electors or not. And in 6 of the states, dueling electors were submitted on January 6th, and the protests on January 6th with all those people there were there to try to persuade the Silver Fox guy to count the dueling electors in the states where the state legislatures had submitted, uh, an alternate slate of electors for Mike Pence to count. And the dueling electors. This is not like a big coup. This is part of the constitutional process, and the process that's laid out by the law of the land as written by the legislature and ratified by um, multiple times in history, 2 different times in history where dueling electors were counted by the vice president, and one of them being Thomas Jefferson himself. So it's not something without precedent. It's not a coup. It's part of uh, the due process of law that's within the laws of the land. And at the point where it became apparent that and and beyond the counting of electors, there's a process where the the House of Representatives goes through and says, okay, does anybody have an objection for these electors, and any of the states can stand up and say I have an objection, and then they have to go and go to a special session of Congress and work out whether the electors from any given state are legitimate, whether they followed the laws of the land in voting. So that process is something that was laid out well ahead of time before January 6th. And what were the the pinch points that were going to occur, and what were the if thens. Those were all laid out by Trump's lawyers and Giuliani, and ahead of time. And what happened with the protest was exactly in line with that plan. And when it became apparent that the dueling electors were not going to be counted, people were upset with Pence for not going along with the plan. And people made a lot of noise to try to get Congress to stand up and fight in the halls of Congress about whether those elections were legitimate, because that's a path that's laid out in the Constitution. And when it became apparent that wasn't happening, that wasn't going to be productive, and that we lost that fight, then Donald Trump told people to go home because the fight's over. And guess what? When he said go home, guess what? People went home. So how is that a coup? Here's the next question for you.
Why did he not tell
When
them
does the transfer? Yeah, when does
they'd
the
already
transfer of
broken into
power
the
occur?
Capitol, though, Doolittle?
Yeah, so the transfer of power occurs on January 26th, not on January 6th, right? Or 28th, whatever. There's an inauguration, okay? And the transfer of power occurs at the inauguration. And after Donald Trump told people to go home, they went home, okay? So there were a few people who broke the law, and they stole things, and they broke windows, and they went into places where they weren't allowed to be going into, and those people are being prosecuted, right? People that broke the law are being prosecuted. That's not a coup. A coup is when you have 100,000 people with guns and they use them to take control of power, and they don't allow the transfer of power. What actually happened was on January 26th, Joseph Biden was sworn in as the president of the United States of America, and there wasn't one shot fired. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that, that there wasn't in terms of the number of people that were there and versus the amount of violence that happened. It wasn't a bloody event. It was not probably it was perhaps, it was not an event that resulted in any elected officials actually being stopped. I'm sorry, they were stopped from engaging in their activities for a while, but it didn't actually stop them permanently from engaging in their activities. So these attacks didn't succeed in stopping the transfer of power. But that doesn't mean that it was not an attempt to stop the transfer of power. If some of the perpetrators who entered the Capitol illegally were not fully aware that disrupting or destroying vital democratic processes that were taking place within was insurrectionist activity that could lead to the destruction of our governmental system, then their foolishness and ignorance doesn't exempt them from their culpability and complicity in an insurrection. I don't think that the amount of violence and the number of people that necessarily matters. The point was what was their intentions, and just because they weren't specifically armed with specific weapons, not everyone was armed with a specific weapon, doesn't mean they didn't commit violence. They committed illegal activities. They broke into the Capitol. They broke windows, and some of them did have some weapons. And they did not actually get their hands on any members of Congress. And part of this is because of the Capitol Police that were there trying to protect the members of Congress and move them out of the building and move them to safety. But the thing is that if they had gotten their hands, if they had reached some of these people they wanted to, we don't exactly know what they would have done. We don't know what they would have done to these people. They could have been murdered. They could have been violently attacked. think of the resulting chaos that could happen in the event of congressional representatives being murdered or violently attacked in our office. I mean, in office. I mean, this could potentially lead to could set off a trigger of events, right? I mean, there were people in protests throughout the country at different types of capitals. I mean, you could have had a dispersion, right? Of the Congress wouldn't have been able to go back to their activities that same day necessarily. You could have had a dispersion of our federal government. You could have had a shutdown of government services and business activities. I mean, these sorts of activities could lead to anarchy, despotism, civil war. I mean, just because these people taking place in these activities didn't effectively accomplish their goals doesn't mean that the danger wasn't real, doesn't mean that the threat wasn't real. The gullibility of those involved doesn't negate the threat. The perpetrators, it's good that they're being prosecuted and held accountable for their crimes. And the problem is that if President Trump had said something and acted a lot sooner, then maybe this could have been prevented, or maybe this could have been mitigated more. And we're lucky that things weren't a lot worse than they were, considering how little action the president took, in my view, considering how long he took to actually come out and, again, tell people to go home. It took a very long time. And right up until that point, I mean, I quoted him several times where he just continues to say that Mike Pence was failing the people in various ways and that he didn't need to certify the election results, even though, in fact, he did need to do that. That was his job. It was his place to do that, and he didn't have any right or power not to. And the events of that day need to be thoroughly investigated. The seriousness of this event shouldn't be dismissed. The politicians who want to dismiss it, I think, are just self-interested. I think that they are undeserving of their positions of power. I think they want to dismiss it for political reasons. So that's just my opinion. I think that our freedom and our democracy are sacred. I think that attacks against our governing bodies threaten to destroy those vital pillars of our society. We can't excuse and condone that kind of activity just because it wasn't violent enough. It wasn't sufficiently violent enough to accomplish its goals. So I guess that's, what some of what I have to say in response to some of the things that you had, some of the things that you mentioned there. But anyway, I'll go ahead and see if I can take another caller here. So I'm going to see how that works. Hold on, I think I need to refresh my
Hey,
page again. Hello, John. Hello.
hello. Don't kick me again, please. I beg of
Okay,
you.
I don't think
Let
I'm
me
going to
speak.
this time. Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Hi. So I'm somewhere in between you and Doolittle, probably a bit closer to Doolittle. You said some of the stuff I was gonna say, so I wanted to address some of the other points you made in your opening spiel, which I did enjoy, by the way. Um, So I think you're right as far as definition of coup goes. I think that if you crack open the dictionary, just say violent thing that is meant to disrupt the activities of a government, like sure, you can call it a coup. I think that's kind of using the definition to kind of abuse the connotation and isn't like, all right, I gotta go. I'll be back. Or actually, hold on. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Sorry
well,
about that. I'm
oh,
back.
yeah, no
Anyway,
problem.
yeah, I
Okay,
think
good.
you're kind of using the definition to abuse the connotation. When people think of coups, they think of like actual hostile takeovers. While you could define it that way, I think it's a bit dodgy, but that's not really where I disagree. Where I really disagree is the use of the word incitement, because the reason Donald Trump has not been prosecuted yet for incitement of violence is because there's no case. He said go peacefully. People in politics say fight like hell or use the word fight metaphorically all the damn time. The idea that this was an incitement of violence is insane. And to give you an example of another case of which this was true is when Bernie Sanders said that the Republicans are trying to take your health care away or some sense, and you have to fight for that. And then you had the congressional baseball shooting by a Bernie supporter where he shot up Congress people. I don't think that Bernie Sanders is responsible for the incitement of violence there, even if he said fight like hell and said the Republicans were doing something bad. Politicians use metaphorical language all the time. Donald Trump said go peacefully before the event. He used the word peacefully specifically. There is no case legally for incitement. It doesn't exist. Um, as far as your comparisons to the BLM stuff, I would say that I think you're forgetting that while Donald Trump might have taken a bit too long to respond, which I actually do think he took a bit too long. I imagine his own ego got in his way a little bit of telling these people who love him to stop doing things. That's my particular theory. But as far as the BLM stuff goes, I mean, mainstream politicians were tutting the BLM riots for a long time. They called it like resistance. They called it protest. I remember Maxine Waters like tutted it repeatedly. And unlike the Capitol protest, the BLM riot actually killed a decent amount of people and caused billions of dollars of damage. And again, just like with it, and honestly, more explicitly, politicians kind of tutted it. I would say most Republicans have condemned the January 6th stuff. Not all of the mainstream leftist politicians who tutted the BLM stuff have condemned it since. And then the last thing I'd say is the threat to democracy idea. I mean, again, I would say you're right symbolically. Seeing that people with like big bowl like hats in congressional halls of power is not a great look. I don't think it's good. I think it's a really bad look for America, and it's not a good idea. But the idea that this was actually a threat to the American system of government, again, I don't know if that's how you meant it, but I know there's a lot of people who say that literally this was a threat to the functioning of America. That's absurd. A couple hundred crazy people in the Capitol building. We're not going to take down the most powerful country of all time. Like, that's not reasonable. They were out of there in a couple hours, and the vote certification went right along just as it had initially been planned.
Well, I don't know what the chances are of them actually having caused real damage there. I think that there was a threat, but as far as their capability of actually overthrowing the government, it's that definitely is questionable and doesn't. And there definitely is a lot of incompetence and maybe a lack of coordination, in some ways a lack of understanding how they wanted to accomplish their goals for a lot of the people that were there that day. But I don't think, but I do think that it creates, yeah, a dangerous precedent, a very dangerous precedent. And I think it's rather frightening that we didn't have a lot faster action by the president that day. So as far as I mean, I think that I it's your yeah. So I mean, I do think that use of the term coup, I think, is an important thing to do, because I don't think you want to diminish the importance of these types of actions, because this isn't the sort of thing that we've seen in the United States before. And it's the frustrating thing is really the failure of our system to come together to stop it. Because if and why and the reasons why that might have happened, which is why it's so important for us to go ahead and investigate the events of that day to find out exactly where the failure in the breakdown in communication happened, or who that was involved in power may have failed to use that power appropriately in order to stop these actions. And were there any people in power that were trying to in some way instigate or coordinate this or allow this to happen because they had some sort of vested interest in it? I don't know. I don't know, but I think that all of these questions have to be thoroughly investigated, because we have to understand why something like this happened, because it shouldn't have happened, really. It should not have been allowed to happen. And it's just astonishing that these people who, like you said, they weren't really they weren't extremely well organized, they weren't extremely competent in what they were trying to accomplish, but they got very far in terms of getting inside the Capitol and being a threat to the members of Congress, who were very scared. If you look at what was going on that day, and they were barricaded in their offices with putting furniture up against the door, and people broke in. And we don't know, again, I think we don't know that. I think that they were right to be scared, and that it's quite possible that that more people could have been killed that day. So it's just unfortunate that that was allowed to happen. So I would but thank you, John, for sharing your views on that. And I'd like to hear somebody else talk now. So let's go ahead.
Hello.
Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. Man, I just disagree with everybody today. I guess that's kind of my MO, but uh, I think that first of all, somebody. I mean, I think it was Doolittle who had said that this was like a safe event because of the death rate, and there was some very dubious mathematics that were employed to reach that conclusion. So, just for the record, if you want to estimate how safe this event is, you have to compare the risk of going to it and the risk of not going to it, and look at the comparative death rates between the two groups. In which case, the background risk of death is present in both of them. So, it definitely was violent, and it definitely was a dangerous event. And I think it's fair to say that the people that were there, at least some of them, were threatening toward democracy, even if I kind of disagree that there was actually a threat, a serious threat to the actual American Republic that day. I think that was never a plausible outcome. I think what happened is a bunch of lunatics surprised and overwhelmed the first layer of security. So Congress had to temporarily suspend activity and be relocated. And then the contingency layers of security cleared out the irritants, and they were prosecuted and are being prosecuted. I think that this event's been over dramatized to a really, really grand degree. Some people were talking about the use of the word coup. I don't want to keep going down the route of terminology. I mean, generally, coup is a results based thing. If you say there was a coup, it's a seizure of power. I think you could maybe say there was an attempted coup, but it's kind of like saying there was a murder. Like if they failed, there's no murder. There's a bunch of people that stormed the Capitol, and a few of them probably would have done dastardly things if the opportunity presented it to them. But I hesitate with the. I mean, I don't think you did this, but some people have been drawing parallels to like September 11th, and I think the vice president herself drew parallels to the September 11th and to December 7th, which is grotesque. It was a terrible thing to do. So, I mean, I just think it was more embarrassing for the United States than it was dangerous for the United States, and that the people who perpetrated it should be prosecuted, and I think they will be. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Yeah, okay. All right. Well, thanks for sharing your point of view. If you'd like to stay on, you can I can go ahead and add you up into the as a speaker here so we can continue to have the conversation and bring in some more people to share their point of view here.
Yep. Talk to you guys later. Gotta go actually, but thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming in, Dave.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
I'll go ahead to the next caller now. Okay, Lance, are you up now? Or Lance, you should be up now. Can you
Yeah,
are you
hey,
ready?
how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Now, unless I'm mistaken, I don't. I think I did, by definition, was not even an attempted coup or insurrection because, unless I'm mistaken, there wasn't tear gas blown in or a SWAT team, bunch of SWAT teams. They kind of just left after a while. And as far as the Capitol Police letting them in, I think they're like Keystone Cops. Frankly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any evidence that there was some kind of collusion where, hey, don't worry, we'll let you in, we'll open the gates. I think it was just a Keystone. Maybe they were sympathetic. These Capitol Police, they never had to deal with anything like that in their life. In the history of the Capitol, very rarely do things like that happen. But so or ever in their lifetime, work time. And so, no, I don't think it was at all attempted coup or insurrection because they just left. They don't leave voluntarily when you're trying to storm the Capitol. I think it was just happenstance, a bunch of opportunistic situation, just a very opportunistic situation where they kind of waltzed in, didn't know what to do, raised hell and vandalized. It was horrific to look at, but in the aftermath, before tragic death, but nothing based on the insurrection itself, really. And there you go. But what scares the bejesus out of me, that's tangentially connected to this, if I may say, is this whole Jenny Thomas thing. Of course, they talk to each other any more than Nancy Pelosi never talks to her husband about the investments that happen right when they do bills or legislation. Of course they do. She calls him the best friend. She mentions her best friend. Talked to my best friend in the meadows, back and forth emails. That's how she refers to her husband, time and time and time again. That's what's scary because I don't know about Alito. I don't think Roberts is, as much as I'm a progressive, he's not evil, right? But the three new ones plus Thomas, those people want to dismantle the administrative state, and that's why that scares me more than all the other stuff. And if I may say, the Koch brothers at the state, local level are putting in literally like hundreds of millions of dollars spread out all over the states from the precinct level, as far as the precinct level of the GOP, the state level, the local level with LGBTQ stuff and CRT. They don't care about that stuff. Maybe CRT a little. They want to dismantle the administrative state, privatize everything at the state level, like education, like DeVos tried to do, and the Democrats aren't trying to stop it. So there's a lot more things going on beneath the surface besides this silly ass so-called insurrection. It was horrific to look at, but it was a bunch of semi-loons, and it was affluent people. Some of these people had a legitimate right, and some of them weren't that flew in on somebody's private jet was because. And I read an article about this. It's interesting. They were screwed at the 2000 dot-com bubble burst. They were businessmen. Some of them, these people, like local, whatever, regional, like business owners. Then they got screwed after 2008 and lost a lot. It wasn't just poor, middle class black. Then they got screwed again after, now. And so it was a confluence of being screwed three times. So it's not just poor people or, poor whites in the rural areas that are getting screwed. It's people that have lost everything that worked their way back up two or three times too, that are upper middle class that were pissed. But anyway, no, it was clearly not that. We got a lot more things to think about than that silly ass Keystone Cops Capitol Police and a bunch of folks that had an opportunistic situation where they wound up in the Capitol, didn't know what the hell to do, vandalized the place, and had some fun and left.
Okay,
There's
but
my
Lance, don't you think that it is, would you say, I guess, I guess I would want to know, do you think that it's a problem that people were able to break into the Capitol?
well, yeah, it was horrific to look at originally. But ultimately, the actual crimes that were committed had nothing to do with overturning democracy because they would have kept the place. And there really were militia type trained people that said, yeah, let's go, let's do this. Not all militias are, evil, but even if they were, in other words, it's kind of contradictory. Paint the worst picture of all these organized militia guys that were there. They didn't do it. They
And
didn't hold down. They could have held down the fort for how long? How many Capitol Police did you see? I didn't see very many. That one guy that was courageous made him lead him to him, the black cop, Capitol Police guy. But they could have held it for a long time and held out. It didn't take SWAT teams or tear gas. There was never any confrontation. So it just wasn't an attempted coup or an attempted insurrection because otherwise it was the most inept one ever in history, considering there was armed militia guys that were trained by the military and trained like that and were, right, all these, far right wingers that were ballsy enough to have militias and train for it. They were pretty bad at it if that's the case. So I don't think we have much to worry about if that's the best we got in terms of people that want to do insurrection because they failed
well, I
miserably.
do think, yeah, I mean, I think I can agree that, there was an ineptitude, and I think that it's, but I mean, do you think that the majority of people there were the type of people who had the military or militia type of training that you're talking about?
No, no. What I'm saying though, they were all there supporting the ones that were. So here you have this mob that you need, right, to support the the actual militia strong arm guys, like the guys that were actually the ones with the, let's say, Che Guevara and the people that were leading the townspeople into these places, right? You had all that going on, and yet and this was the 3% and the oath keepers. These are the best of the best. These are the baddest of the baddest, the worst of the worst, the ones that are most organized. So this is the best that the far right could do with everything they had going for them up to right now in terms of the aftermath and all the, like, the next domino is going to fall or something. On a state level, there's horrific things going on that aren't militia type things. They're Koch brothers. It's going to be people in suits and ties at the school board. So I mean, that's a whole other subject. But yeah, so you see my point. This is like the worst they had. This is the best they could do, the far right. And I don't like them either, but if this is the best they had, and this is the best they could do for a prison, I don't think we have much to worry about because it didn't even take any resistance from the police or from anybody in law enforcement for them to just leave and go home.
Well, well, do you think that? I was going to say, do you think that it was concerning what the president had to say to the people in that crowd before and during the event?
Well, I mean, Trump's a goofball who's an idiot, who's a buffoon and a clown. So anything he does is going to be like that. So that's like saying that, the sun rose today. I mean, so yeah, no, terrible. Everything he said since he talked about Mexicans and rapists coming across the border before even when he first ran, and everything since that then. I mean, so I don't know what that has to do with the fact that yeah. So I mean, yeah. Everything he said on January 6th was horrible. Everything he said was bad, and all the things he said behind the scenes were horrible. And he was just being Trump, like he's been ever since people that knew about him in the '70s. He's never changed. So I don't know what that proves. Trump has been the same guy for 50 years. He's been in the public sphere. New York is I'm
Mhm.
from New York, so I knew about him, on a more intimate level from people that even knew people who knew him in New York City. So the business people think he's a clown. That's why he always wants revenge against rich people and elites. It's a personal thing because they took all his hotels away and all of his assets away, put him on a $750,000 a month uh, allowance, but his brand was worth enough. They said, we won't bankrupt you. That's what happened when he went down the first couple of bankruptcies. He was the number one, and this is on the record, number one loss of money for 10 years in a row. He lost more money than any American, like during the 10-year span that he was losing money. But that's
Hmm.
another subject. I
Wow.
don't mean to get
Uh,
tangential, but yeah. So anyway, like I said, if this is the best the right wing had, I don't know if you have a really response to that. I'm not trying to play gotcha, but
so
it
what
wasn't.
so what did as far as his failure to call the National Guard a lot sooner, is that what I mean, as far as his actions taken to call the National Guard or to take some kinds of actions to stop this, what do you think what do you think about that, what that says, the precedent that says in terms of the the I'm sorry, not the precedent. What do you think that says about his um about the about his state of mind that he wasn't
To
calling
send
for
the
this to
national wait,
very
to send the National
forcefully
Guard
for
to
this
the
to stop
Capitol. Wait,
till
to send.
after a lot of events had transpired,
Okay. You mean
until
to
the
send on January 6th? You mean send the National Guard then?
yeah, because it took 4 hours until after these protesters had broken through the Capitol Police ranks before the National Guard were actually deployed to take action here, which is a pretty long time frame. And the people on the ground, the chief of police, had asked for help multiple times. He had been begging for help over and over again, and the and apparently there was a meeting in which the army secretary in which I'm sorry in which Lieutenant Governor General Pyatt said that was asked to deploy the National Guard, and what the chief of police says is that only the is said that he was told in response that only the Army Secretary McCarthy has the authority to approve that request, and that he would not recommend that Secretary McCarthy approve the request for assistance directly to the Capitol. Supposedly, according to the chief of police, he says he was told by Lieutenant Governor General Pyatt, I don't like the visual of the National Guard
No,
standing a police line with the Capitol in the background. And then
I understand.
supposedly, one more thing. Supposedly, it says that General Charles Flynn, the Army Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, was actually on this phone call. And again, this call took place, I want to say it was a couple hours before the National Guard was even deployed. And it says that the Army falsely denied for 2 weeks, or that this Lieutenant General was on that call, and it turns out he was. He is coincidentally the brother of Michael Flynn, but that's just something to note that seems a little bit concerning to me, but the
My
point but that was but the point is that a lot of people were aware that there was a serious problem and the chief of police was begging for assistance and yet nothing came.
Well, again, if you look back 2020, we do know two things. One is that there was a lot of undercover FBI guys there. No, I don't think it was a false flag operation, but they were there and they were communicating with somebody. And I'm guessing this person on the phone call may or may not have been in touch. Their communication might not have been that great. One of the reasons 9/11 was so tragic. That's another story for another day, not to compare the two. But in other words, as far as the National Guard, okay, we know looking back 22 things we know. Looking back 2020, nobody was pulling guns or like storming all the doors to find that one time that the guy led them away. They didn't. Okay, so we know what happened in the aftermath. That it wasn't a bloodbath inside. They weren't, killing the cops or trying to do anything to the people. Okay, we know that now. Why? How do we know that those FBI guys was not still there reporting back, quietly? They have ways to talk. There's little mini phones, they might, who, and we're reporting back saying, yeah, no, nothing's happened yet. No, 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 they're just doing this. So if the reporting that was of what was, yeah, they're in the, we don't know quite where this guy is, but there's no noise, there's no shots, there's no hostage situation. So it may be the case that they weren't needed. And you know what? As someone who doesn't like overreaction, looking back on it now, I'm sure as hell glad they didn't send out the National Guard because they've been looking for reasons to do that, like they're doing with protesters everywhere and passing laws in like over half the states to literally outlaw protesting. And now you can, in some states, run over protesters if they're in the road, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm, again, so much more worried about that than this silly distraction of what happened on January 6th. And that's already, I really have to reiterate what I said. Like I said, in the aftermath, nothing really bad did happen. We didn't need the National Guard. So I'm thrilled they didn't get
So
sent
you
in.
don't think that the members of Congress were under threat at any point
AOC
during
was
this
in a
attack?
separate building. AOC was in a separate building and she was safe in the first 10 minutes of this stuff. And she pretended she was under threat. She was never under threat. She was a lying fraud. She was never under
Okay,
threat.
well, I don't know about I don't
Look
really
it up.
believe or disbelieve anything that she says. I don't have a as far as I don't know what her I don't know what her level of honesty is, but
But what I'm saying is
um
if the Keystone Cops Capitol Police couldn't, and that's all they needed. They needed a couple hundred more cops, maybe. That's all they needed. They had a locked van with all their SWAT gear in it they couldn't get into. It was Keystone Cops. So in other words, if she's like, but wait a minute, the bank got robbed. Well, yeah, because it was Mayberry and it was the old guy that was the security guy and it was Don, it was Barney Fife and but they took all the money. Well, yeah, but they left the door open and it had no security. But the bad guys did such horrible things. It's like, no, I don't buy that either because would never have gotten anywhere near these people that were so truly, yeah, scared and somewhat threatened because some were in the building in a cloakroom somewhere, but they never should have gotten anywhere near there. It's the capital. Is this all America could do for $1 trillion a year of security? But we can't even protect the people that do our business by not letting them get there when we knew what was going on at that time. Not the National Guard, just the Capitol Police had enough. And what does the squad, what does the squad do? They give them another billion. But you see my point? It's like, no, I'm not going to say that they had Keystone cops at the door. So therefore you have to go that much harder on the people that robbed the bank because it was left on the table any more than I'm going to yell at a kid or I'm going to, if I'm a bartender, the guy left his change for 100 on the table on the bar and went to the men's room and somebody stole his $98, well, these days, $90. No, I'm not going to cry as much as if somebody punched somebody in the face and did it. So no, I just don't. I don't see how these people would have got anywhere near these our leaders, and whoever they are, they're our elected leaders. They should be protected. But no, not just because the Keystone Cops were the ones at the gate doesn't mean that there's. Oh my God! But they got so close and they threatened. Yeah, that's why. So let's put the cops in jail for or I mean, let's fire all the Capitol Police and say diligence of duty or criminal negligence if you
I
will, for the
well,
vandalism, right?
yeah,
Because
I don't know if it's
they're just
yeah,
as
I don't know
guilty
if
of
the
letting it
Capitol
happen.
Police, right, deserved. Yeah, I don't know if they deserve to. Yeah, I'm not sure if they totally deserved all the criticisms that they got. I think that I don't. There were a lot of failures that happened that day, and in terms of how this situation was handled, and I'm not sure who is to blame exactly. but it's like you said, they weren't prepared for that. So, and I don't know who exactly who there is to blame for that exactly, because there was a
Well,
lot of incompetence going
how many
around
of those
that
people
day,
were
and I'm not
investigated?
sure.
Yeah, but now you have
Yeah.
Biden. That was Trump. That was Trump people. Now Biden's in there. How many people from the DOJ have you heard that said, "Yeah, we got to like question these cops as material witnesses to actually put anybody on trial from the Trump administration for this specifically"? Nobody. It's only about the insurrectionists. What about the people that like made the
But I
decisions to not do anything preemptively? One of the reasons is they wanted to they need to have stuff that happens so that they can crack down later. Part of 9/11, not maybe or maybe not, but in terms of the aftermath. But anyway, I don't mean to keep talking. Go ahead.
Well, I just don't. Yeah, I just don't, yeah, I don't think I can agree with you that this wasn't an important consequential event, and because I do think that there was a real threat to members of Congress. So I do think it's a problem that, if considering the fact that the Capitol was breached and the Capitol Police weren't able to manage and handle the situation for whatever reason, I think it's a complete failure. It's a complete failure that the National Guard weren't deployed sooner, much sooner, in order to keep our members of Congress safe and get these rioters, get these attackers out of that
Yeah, but
building, because I
what you,
think that there was a real threat to people inside the building, and
but you
the
disagree
optics
with
of
it.
it, not only were the optics bad, but it was a dangerous situation that you can't have, we can't be having these kinds of attacks against our governing bodies, especially not in the middle of certifying the election results, which is such an important democratic norm that you can't just dismiss these. I don't think you can just dismiss these kinds of things because there's other important issues going on in the world. I think that this has to be investigated. We have to find out what the failures were and where they happened. And I think we need to hold people accountable who didn't do their jobs that day. But,
Well, I agree, but see, that's the whole point, and that's the whole bottom. I'll stop there. Is that all of the attention is on these insurrections, so-called, these rioters. I'll call them rioters at January 6th, when it was the chiefs of the top Capitol Police and the decisions made at the top to ignore stuff beforehand, to allow it to happen when they knew that they could have put a few more cops there. So none of that is being done. So that proves that they don't want to fix it. They gave them $1 billion more so they could take that Capitol Police. Now, what does this have to do with protecting people in D.C.? They're going to spread that money in 50 states. What the hell? What's that got to do with protecting people in Washington? That's where that money's going. And so what I'm saying is they're not trying to fix the problem. They're fooling you. They want you to be distracted by this, and they want you to think it's a monumental thing. Meanwhile, the Koch brothers are taking over state and local governments. They're already doing this. They're funding with charter schools, with private funding of whole curriculum, like practically the textbook. They're funding whole wings of schools at college level and business. They're taking over the country from the grassroots, while we look at these fireworks displays when there's a lot of real killing and a lot of real death and destruction going on. That's all they're doing. It's a distraction from both sides. From Adam Schiff, who's like the most corrupt politician in the entire, Republican or Democrat. It's Biden not doing anything about trying to figure out what happened. The Capitol Police isn't being fixed. None of these things are happening that you're talking about. You see what I mean? So no, it's just like I said, it's a distraction, and it's an overblown thing to distract us from the 1,000 other things that are going on that are so much worse.
all right, Lance. Well, I can't say that I agree with that characterization, but thank you for sharing your view. And I think we're going to go ahead to the next caller. If you'd like to stay on, you're welcome to stay on as a speaker and continue with the conversation later on. And I'm going to go ahead and take the next caller at this time. All right. Dan, can you hear me? Are you on?
Hello, can you guys
Hello.
hear me?
Hi. Yes, hello.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Um,
I really wanted, I'm sorry, before you go, I just wanted to point out that I'm seeing that a lot of people here are complaining in the comments section that that there wasn't really violence or danger going on that day. And yeah, so if you want to jump into the caller chat and share your view, please go ahead. But I don't see how anybody can make that claim because I mean it seems clear to me that breaking and entering violently and forcefully is cause to be concerned when you're breaking into the Capitol in and of itself. I don't think you need a lot more evidence than that. And also the fact that they didn't get to the members of Congress. I mean, that's because they were hiding, they were fleeing, they were barricading their offices, and the Capitol Police were trying to protect and evacuate them. So, and also, I mean, I actually want to point out that if it weren't for Officer Eugene trying to keep the protesters away from the Senate, if they had actually come a minute earlier, they would have actually seen Mike Pence because the timing was that Mike Pence was being whisked away by the Secret Service about 1 minute before a group of protesters came into the part of the building where he was located. But anyway, go ahead, Dandan.
Hi. Yeah. So,
Hey, Dandan, we're getting
my initial
double.
idea.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we're getting double from you. I think it might. Do you have the YouTube stream on or something?
No, I don't.
Oh, that's better.
1 second.
That's better. You're
Oh,
good.
it's done.
Yep.
Okay. So, first of all, I think that January 6th was a terrible event, and I think that one of the things that really bothers me is the amount of underplaying I have heard of what actually happened. There's this type of almost absolute way in which people are speaking about it, where they go, well, this event by itself, it wasn't strong enough, it wasn't powerful enough to really take over the government, so why are we worrying about it? And it's not like everyone over there was organized and trying to deal with it. Why is it such a big deal? And for me, we're kind of deep. It's almost like looking at history through like a textbook lens, or I'm trying to understand it like a movie. Let's think of like the Tea Party. Let's think of all the revolutionary acts of the founding fathers. We really think it was an entirely organized movement? It was a few people who were part of a few committees who got the people riled up in the street and walked there. And like, while a bunch of people were watching, there was 20 people dumping things off the boat with the other 50 to 60 cheering. Imagine you were a British citizen saying, man, they're just dumping tea. They couldn't topple the British army, right? It wasn't a big deal. Like, this is just such an underplaying of the situation. Political
Right.
movements change and happen over a long period of time. Right? So for me, that just uh, doesn't make any sense. We have to be aware that there was a serious effort, a coordinated effort, not just by specific paramilitary groups who showed up, even if they didn't have guns, right? I mean, we all agree here, and I think most people agree that the right to bear arms doesn't just mean firearms, bats, knives, whatever it might be, right? The law has long established that you can defend your life with a gun if they don't have a gun. If you feel physically threatened, we consider that a legitimate threat. So just because there weren't guns doesn't mean he wasn't violent. So let's just get that out of the way.
Yeah, I
Um,
absolutely agree with that. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't see how you can characterize it as unviolent when you force your way into a building in spite of the fact that there were police there trying to prevent you from entering, and you had to break windows and break doors to get inside and use a lot of, and they did, again, they did have weapons. Their weapons were, things like fire extinguishers, right? I mean, they had pepper spray.
flagpoles.
Right. Yeah, all kinds of
Yeah. I
all
mean, they
kinds of
hung a
things like
noose
that.
in the on the outside of the Capitol, right? Which is classic, right? We hang a noose because we're trying to not harm the people who are certifying the elections. Anyhow,
I mean,
the
I don't
second
see
thing I
how,
wrote.
I mean, it's funny to me that people would say it's overblown when we all know what happened. It's not really a mystery, right? I mean, we can all make our
Yeah.
own judgments. I mean, about what's going on, but but it's surprising to me that anybody would not see it as a problem when you have an attack on the Capitol where the Capitol is breached and there are members of Congress inside, whose lives are in danger because we don't know what this mob of people is going to do if they get a hold of these members of Congress. And during such an important time in during such an important event where they're trying to certify an election, a peaceful transfer of power, when we know that these people breaking into the office don't want them to do that. They don't want them to accomplish that goal of certifying the election. And not only
Yeah.
that, but you had Trump all day saying that Mike Pence was basically, I don't, basically saying that he was a traitor and that he could stop, that he didn't have to certify the election and that he's disappointed
Mhm.
in him and that this is such a, basically a miscarriage of justice. And he goes out of his way to, as I quoted some of his quotes earlier on in the day here. And these are the kind of things that, that are going to make people really extremely wanting to do something to stop this transfer of power, because he's going out of his way to say, you don't have a country anymore if this happens. If they take away this election from us, they take away this fair
Yeah.
election from us. So not only is he, lying and spreading misinformation, because that's just false, it's absurdly false, but then he's using it to create a really dangerous situation here. And what is their objective inside the Capitol if not to stop the events that are going on that day? So it's again, we don't know what would have happened if they had actually reached some of these members of Congress. And no, it's not. And the failures, and it's just such an important thing to think about, the fact that why was this even allowed to happen? So and there's so many failures, and so much going on behind the scenes that is really concerning.
Hmm. So that reminds me of, like, I remember who it was earlier was talking about the timeline where Trump told them to go home and they went home. So this is just, we can just simply Google it, go to Fox News, CNN, and look at the time frame. It's very clear that the SWAT team, there was an FBI SWAT team who entered the building. We know where Ashley Babbitt got shot in the neck. This is where the SWAT team was kind of heading towards. They stopped people on the steps. They entered the building at 4:14. Trump then tweets a video telling them to go home at 4:17. This was way before, right? People were already breaking into the Capitol, right? I think it was 2:24 p.m. Trump said Pence didn't have the courage. 2 hours about an hour later, and after the SWAT team came in, he finally told them to go home. That's not indicative of someone who was telling people to go home, and I think that's very disingenuous to even say. Um, and
Hmm.
then to add to the point where I heard specific people say things around the lines of Republicans are condemning it, they don't approve of it. I don't know if anyone's been up to date. Have you seen the recent Axios interview with Mitch McConnell?
No.
So I forgot the name of the reporter. He was sitting down with Mitch McConnell and he asked them, where do your moral red lines sit? And he goes, because on one hand, at the January 6th, at the impeachment, you said Donald Trump is responsible, both morally and, like, you could clearly see he was responsible for the riot on the Capitol. And then a week later, you said that you're going to support him and you're going to be okay with him running as president if he's a nominee of the Republican Party. They ousted Liz Cheney. Um, Republicans are literally running on a platform of helping people who were into insurrection not go to jail for those who actually committed violent crimes because they were just good patriots. What this is party over country. There's no question about this. This is simply, where do your loyalties lie? Are they with the United States or are they with the GOP? And Mitch
Right.
McConnell, the speaker for the GOP, has openly admitted that it's for the GOP, not for the United States. If Trump is the nominee for the Republican Party, he's going to support it because he's a Republican first, then he's an American citizen. That's how he operates. The leader of the GOP. So this weird whataboutism that I'm consistently hearing about. For some reason, Maxine Water was showing up and the Koch brothers. I have no idea what's happening. But if we stake to the topic of January 6th and what happened here, like, something is not in precedent, it means a lot. It means that never before in the history of the United States has a violent coordinated by some groups tried to stop the certification of an election. This is the brute facts. And to ignore that, to me, is just willfully ignorant, or because you're somehow wrapped up in red team versus blue team.
Could I ask you guys a quick
That's right.
question?
Never before has that act. You're right. Never before has that happened. I'm sorry. Who? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Now, Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of burning of buildings, and there was a lot of turning over of cars. There was a lot of violence, within all the Black Lives Matter movement, protests, which I support 10,000%. By the way, let me be clear. What do you think should happen to the folks that, they all they burn buildings? Boy, that's kind of insurrectionist or coup like. So in other words, what should happen to the people that did that? Should they all get like maximum sentences and be treated harshly for treated like violent terror, domestic terrorist criminals? What do you think?
It's uh I mean, it's as far as I mean, I think anybody that's breaking the law should be prosecuted. So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that.
You would say the same thing,
Say the same thing. When crimes are, yeah,
towards the
as
Black Lives
Benson said, when
Matter
crimes are
protesters
committed,
as you
they
did
should
the
be, yeah,
so-called
tried, sent to
insurrectionists on January
jail.
6th.
I'm sorry, say that again. Like your voice uh,
What
distorted.
your statement is, what your statement is now, what you guys are saying about the January 6th, absolutely. I don't think you're insurrectionists or, coup, but you're not using those terms about the Black Lives Matter folks. So in other words, in
Well,
terms of
but we're not
whatever
really
violence they did, they let
okay.
do that. So
Well,
I mean, should they
right.
be treated
I
as
mean, we
harshly?
can't
In other
use
words,
those
the amount
terms
of
about the Black Lives Matter folks. I mean, they were, I mean, there were during the Black Lives Matter protests, there was some real serious damage and violence that occurred, but
like
it
January
wasn't
6th,
something that
absolutely.
was actually a threat to our system of government. It was something that was it was not attacking a governing body. It wasn't trying to stop a transfer of power, a democratic norm. It was a threat, and it was a problem. It was a danger to everybody that was involved. And but no, I
Exactly.
don't
And I
think you
agree
could use the
January
same
6th was too.
terminology. I don't think you could use the exact same
Yeah,
terminology to describe the events
yeah.
and if in terms of using the word insurrection.
Okay, well,
As
they were
far as
threatening people.
okay,
They were pretty threatening to the people that are inside those buildings, not the ones they burned down, but the ones that they surrounded and were rioting around. Those people inside that were the government officials, not just cops. They felt pretty threatened. I think they felt like it was pretty insurrection-y to them. But don't you think? In other words, I really don't think you're looking at the
no, I don't
violence and
think
all
that
the
was their
outcomes of
goal.
what
Their
happened.
goal wasn't to take down government. Their goal was just to sort of cause chaos and destruction. And that should have been stopped as quickly as possible. I mean, through force. Those events should have been stopped, and everybody involved should have been arrested immediately.
Hello?
Because of in cops, once again, they knew riots, but they didn't know how to de-escalate. What I'm saying is, because we know the aftermath, though. See, this is what I'm saying now is that, oh my God, they're going to take over the building and they're going to kick all the people out and they're going to take it over. You might have thought that then, just like you might have at January 6th, but they didn't say that. They didn't. Oh, okay. They didn't. Usually people are saying I'm too loud. So yeah. So oh, I'm sorry. Hello.
I don't. I've been kind of confused. I refreshed, but I still don't see him.
Trying. Won't let me. I'm hitting. In other words, I'm hitting hang up so I could hit leave room, and I'm not. It won't let me mute either. Wait a minute.
Okay. Um, all right, but yeah, thank you, Lance, for sharing your point of view here. And I don't see Dandan on the line anymore, so I guess he's dropped out. So let's go ahead and take another caller. Condor, can you hear me? Or are you
Hey,
on?
yeah, I'm here. How y'all doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are
Yeah.
you doing tonight?
I was hearing Lance and I was like, dang, isn't it? Lance isn't the listeners for me. So for him to be able to talk was phenomenal. I don't know how he did that.
Well, I had tried to put him in as a speaker earlier, but for some reason he wasn't showing up as a speaker, and when he started talking, I was extremely confused. So,
I
but I'm
see.
glad that in terms of why I was confused because he wasn't showing up as a speaker, but on my visually. So,
Yeah. That's pretty interesting how that happens. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about how I mean what I've been hearing today is what I think I've been hearing is I've been hearing two sides, right? But I think everybody's kind of talking past each other a little bit because I mean with the left and I think in general, and tell me if this is right or wrong, is what you're saying is that there was a group of people in the Capitol that had the potential for violence and stopping an election. That's scary for you, right? Because I'm sure, I don't want to like take you for granted or guess your position and be wrong about it, but here it goes. You're on the left, right? Like, would you generally characterize yourself as someone on the left?
no, I wouldn't. I'm politically homeless, so I wouldn't be accepted by the left, and I wouldn't associate myself with the left or the right. I would call myself a moderate.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's that camp that does think January 6th was a really, really big deal. And I don't think it was not a big deal. And here's why. Because I don't think January 6th itself is a big deal in itself alone. I think that it's a symptom of where we're at, just like the Black Lives Matter movement, right? If there's a lot of people willing to go out there and protest and march for something, I mean, it's not just with that. You have like the March for Life. You have a lot of people marching on all corners of whatever, however many spectrums, right? But in all political, in every political part, there's always some kind of demonstration where um, people have a point. And I think that calling January 6th the coup, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think it's inaccurate because a coup, it's short for coup d'état, right? And coup d'état would be people in the government forming a coalition, taking control of the military and unseating the government as it is and making a new government, right? Whereas a revolution would be a bottom up tactic where the people come together and form a revolution, a popular revolution with arms, right? So I just don't think that was any of the above. I do think it was, it's definitely demoralizing to see see people in the Capitol breaking windows and to see, the protester woman, Ashley Babbitt, get shot by a cop. That was kind of crazy. Apparently she had an anxiety attack from what I can see, and she got shot by a cop, and that's not good, man. And the same way, and yeah, some other cases, cops do shoot people. It happens. But that's going down a different rabbit hole. But yeah, I think there's a point to the right of January 6th where and the left has made this point too with Bush, his first term, where Bush, his first term, I don't know if you guys have read up on that or remember that, or I mean, I was a kid at the time, right? So I wouldn't remember, but I've read up on it. And the left side of the aisle was calling for a recounts of votes, and this has happened on both sides where both people. Are you going to say something? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead. I don't know if
Oh,
there's some
okay.
background noise here.
I don't want to like grandstand, but yeah, like it's not the first time that we've had people complain that hey, the votes are being the election was fraudulent, and the thing is there's no way to actually independently verify that. Like let's say Donald Trump won but he wasn't supposed to, right? Let's turn it on its head. How are we supposed to verify that if a state just does voting a certain way and it's to a large number of people's dissatisfaction, maybe a sizable minority, right? And people are asking questions and it's like like for instance, one of the things like mail-in voting. We saw a lot of mail-in voting, but we didn't see a lot of security, right? So you could literally go into somebody's mailbox, and there's pictures all on the internet. And during the election, I saw this, and there's just pictures. There's this one apartment complex in California where the mailbox isn't even secured, and there's just stacks and stacks of ballots. So I think for depending on the state, if all I have to do is fill out ballots and put an address and make a name and they accept it, well, that's pretty bad, you know? Like that's something that's questionable, and I think it deserves question. And I think, you know, anybody that questions something, I kind of get, you know, they either one may not know totally, or there may actually be a problem. And I think January 6th, it's more than just breaking into the Capitol. It's a bunch of people having a problem, and I just don't think they're being listened to. So, you know, it kind of the Black Lives Matter movement's kind of the same way. I mean, there are people that will say, "Oh yeah, Black Lives Matter," blah blah blah, but they'll just go and do the same thing that they've always done and what's good for them. And you know that they'll say, "Well, you know, I believe that a black man should have this position," but they won't give it up. You know, so I think everybody's got some kind of point. There's some truth in there somewhere, and I just think it's important to listen. And calling January, you know, since we're talking about January 6th, I think calling it a coup and just writing it off as bad totally, and it just it cuts people's voice off. Does that make sense?
I don't it I think that I'm on your I'm on I can kind of see where you're coming from in some of the things you were saying there, in terms of the fact that you've got a lot of people that have a lot of that feel disenfranchised, that have some concerns that they feel very strongly are legitimate, and that they don't want those concerns to be undermined by January 6th, by the events of that day. But I think that it doesn't help them or their cause to dismiss the events of that day as being a just sort of some sort of silly, non-violent, non-important event, when I do think it was a serious problem what happened that day that needs to be addressed and investigated. As far as the definition of coup d'état, that is a what I'm seeing for that is one of the basic definitions is a sudden violent overthrow of an existing government by a small group. And I think that that is exactly the aims of a lot of people, in terms of wanting to stop a transfer of a wanting to stop that transfer of power in order to install the president of their choice. Now, I think they legitimately believed that
Hmm.
they may very well, and they probably did legitimately believe that that president had legitimately won that election, but it doesn't mean that they were
Hmm.
correct. They were false. And it doesn't mean that the events that transpired weren't a problem. So I think that people that have concerns and problems with government from the right side, they need to have, in order to have their concerns taken seriously. And in our system of government, you're always going to have people dismissing your point of view regardless of what it is. But in order for anybody's concerns to be taken seriously, you can't dismiss evidence, things that are happening right in front of your face, in terms of this coup itself. So I think that the more you I think that that if they want their I think that anybody that wants their concerns to be heard needs to be mindful of not needs to be mindful that they have to look at each situation independently and honestly and judge it without bias. So people shouldn't look at the events of January 6th and say that it doesn't mean anything, because it hurts their cause politically if it does mean something.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think it's it's just a sign of things to come. You know, it's not. I don't think it's going to get any better. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know. So
Yeah,
in
honestly, that's
itself, I
part
don't
of
think
the
that's
frightening, right? The frightening part of the tribalism, right? A frightening
yes,
symptom of the tribalism, right?
yeah,
That's overcome our country.
yeah, absolutely. But here's the thing, like it, both sides have raised questions about the election, but I feel like the election system, like wouldn't it be nice for me to go to on a website, and that's what I think January 6th was about, right? I think we all agree that it was about voting and in general, like what happened during COVID. A lot of those people that went there saw that voting was being open. um, so I would just say that what I see is that there's a problem with their voting system, and then and even the left side of the aisle said the same exact thing. I think even Trump, when he won, he said the election was fraud. You know, there was fraud in the election. It's like, dude, you won, but he said. So I mean, that's funny. That's pretty funny, honestly. But yeah, I mean, he says things like that. But you know, it's just like we can say day and night. It was this. It was, you know. Was there the potential for violence? I think so. I guess it depends on your definition for violence, like emotional violence. If you encompass emotions and violence, yes, it was violent. But if you think violence as physical contact, there was like one or two. Well, I mean, the people breaking windows, plus you know, the cop shooting the girl, and I think there was a cop that died of an aneurysm later, which didn't. I mean, arguably, you could say that had nothing to do with it. I mean, that was the. It depends on your definition of violence, and I think that's one of the things where we're talking past each other. When you say violence, people in the audience might think, well, nobody got hit. You know, that's why they're talking about you know, actual like contact violence, right? That's what you're hearing from them. When I think you and Dan, so far it's just been you and Dan taking kind of the a similar, not dissimilar position, but you know, you guys are talking about more than that. You're talking about emotions. Is that correct?
I'm talking about the fact that the Capitol was breached by force. I mean, they forced their way into a building, they broke
Mhm.
windows, and they carried a variety of weapons of various kinds. And they did have to push and fight police violently. I don't think that people were
Mhm.
seriously injured because I think that the police were careful enough to, you know, in a lot of cases they didn't, they backed off in some cases, and they didn't want to be overwhelmed by the crowd, and they didn't want to have to fight and shoot a lot of people. And if they had acted differently, I think we might have seen a lot more violence that day. But regardless of actually who was actually physically assaulted or not, although I think there were definitely some physical assaults that were happening,
Mhm.
I think that the actions of that day were violent. They were not violent in the sense that they carried powerful weapons. Most of the people did not
Mhm.
carry carry guns, and did not use deadly force. But again, I think part of that has to do with the fact that the Capitol Police probably didn't want to be in a situation where they were forced to use deadly force against these attackers. And these attackers, their main goal was to get inside the building, which they achieved. And for many of them, I believe that it appears that their goal was to stop this transfer of power. And if they had been able to get a hold of these members of Congress, we don't know what they would have done to them. So I
Yeah.
think that you're looking at a very dangerous situation, and even if it was only a few people in there that had murderous intent or had the intent to bludgeon or hurt members of Congress in some way, it could have happened. So it's, you know, the level of violence here, I think, is not really is doesn't dismiss the event, the seriousness of what happened. I don't think the fact that the violence wasn't more severe, I don't think dismisses the threat and the danger and the fact that this was a terrible thing to have happened.
Oh yeah. I mean, it is a terrible thing. to happen. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Um, yeah, yeah, I see where you're coming from. It's just I wish it wouldn't have happened. The people breaking windows and I think it's 71 of them are going to jail for things like that. I will say though, on the other side, looking at it, that there are people in jail that they're actually getting acquitted. So, like for instance, there's a case, I think it was in Texas, where there was one case where a man got acquitted and he took the stairs and the cops let him in. I don't remember exactly what town. I wish I could tell you the town, but it's like Houston or something like that. He was acquitted because he took the stairs where another guy climbed over a wall, so that showed violent intent. So therefore, he got put in prison, right? So um, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't know how many people the cops let in. I mean, I saw video; it was a large number, but how many people broke a window? I saw, I think, one picture of a man climbing through a broken window. There's another picture inside the Capitol I could see. I can't really, I kind of can't see a lot of evidence about the broken windows and how many people's climbing through. So it's just one of those things where I think we have to have the definite to be able to prove, like we have to prove it's this or that. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, and I hear that. Like you're saying, okay, there was one um, act of violence, but we shouldn't focus on that. It was still a bad incident. I think I agree with that. But also on the other hand, I think the other side might say, well, is a shooting in front of the Capitol building an attempt to overthrow the government? And I think I don't think that's true.
Well, as far as the shooting in front of, as far as the one shooting goes, so you're saying, I don't think that I wouldn't characterize that one shooting as an event to overthrow the Capitol. I would character to overthrow the government. I would say that
Hmm.
the fact that their aim was to install a president undemocratically, um, and uh, they, whether or not they believed it was undemocratic, their aim was to install a president who was not democratically elected and to stop a peaceful transfer of power. And that is something that
Well, I
they I
I don't think that was everyone's aim, if that makes sense. Like, I think there were people definitely, like you're saying, their objective was to do, and that's the thing. We can't really read minds, and I feel like if I was to say, okay, the whole group, their objective was to completely stop the election, no matter what, no matter if it was rightfully won by Biden, they just want to install Trump. Well, I certainly think that might be true, but it's just I don't know. Maybe they wanted something where an investigation was done into these elections and it had more time rather than elect the president. Then, I mean, this kind of makes me think. I did watch a couple videos. There was one video in Atlanta where there were poll workers kicking out the Republican poll watchers, and they still ran ballots 2 hours after, and it's on camera, and you can watch it. Um, uh, there are bad things that happen in the election. Now, does that warrant, like, is that small amount of time really going to change the outcome? I mean, it may possibly could have. I don't know, but I think that might be the point. Is that there there was opportunity because a lot of people there are a lot of people saying Donald Trump's basically the devil, and I guess if I was on the left, if I was a hard lefty, right, and I was in Atlanta, I was a poll worker, I mean that area is heavily, heavily left, so I bet a large number of the poll workers were on the left, and I just can't explain that video any other way. Well, if I'm on the far left, right, and I think Donald Trump's the devil, do you think I'm going to throw the election any way I can? Absolutely. Absolutely, because he's the devil, man. You don't want him in office. And a lot of people, I think, when they voted, uh is like 150,000 people in Georgia alone voted just against Donald Trump, basically for Biden. But it was an against Donald Trump vote because they didn't fill out the rest of the ballot. You know what I'm saying? So I just I think part of the I think there's a lot that went on, and I just don't see the January 6th people having no I don't see myself condemning all of them. There's a few, but I just can't say it was all one movement. They have a high, they're not the Borg. They don't have a hive mind. So I can't say I just can't call it all bad. Just like the Black Lives Matter protests, I can't say one protest because a couple people burned down a building. And I hate to make that comparison. I know you guys don't like it, but it's. I'm just comparing violent, riots to riots, right? And I think that at least everybody here can agree that January 6th was technically a riot because some people made it so. By definition, I guess it would at least everybody have to agree on that.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
You're
Yeah.
equating
So I
you're
mean, I
equating
just
you're equating breaking into a 7-Eleven and stealing a bag of chips to people breaking into the Capitol and stealing the country, right?
Well, they're not going to steal the country. There was never a hope of them stealing the country. And I think if they really tried to steal the country, if that was really the intent, they would have brought their weapons. They would have. It was a lot of people, a lot of conservative people. There's maybe some moderate people, different sides of the right in there. There were some far right people, but none of them brought weapons. So to me, that's just kind of like, there was a coup in Turkey, right? There was like 9,000 military personnel involved in that, and that was like, oh, how it was like 10 years ago or something like that. I mean, that was a coup, but calling this a coup too, I think there's a distinction to be made here that
You know what
it's
Penn
not.
said? Penn said if he would have did what he did, the country would have ended because that would have been Armageddon right there. People vote will being overridden like that. That's America's done. It would be civil war.
Wait,
I mean,
I'm
I
sorry.
don't think that like I mean, I agree that like with the ideas that Nivik is saying in the sense that this I do think that this is a serious thing. I mean, that happened in terms of it being more serious than just a riot. I don't think
Hmm.
it's fair to
I'm saying
characterize it
if
on equal
Penn
grounds
said
as
if
a
he
riot.
would have done what he done and overriding the will of the people, then the America would have ended, and that would I think the shit would have hit the fan. That would have that's a civil war. That's an act of war. That would if he would have done that, he
I
would have
mean,
divided
There,
the
yeah,
country
I mean,
completely.
you can't dismiss the seriousness of the I mean, you can't dismiss the seriousness of failing to certify election results when the election has been concluded and completed in a democratic fashion, and when we can be quite certain that 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 the results of that election are accurate. And I and the problem is that you can't have these things happening where you just have people that decide they're going to stop this kind of transfer of power by force. And you want to say that the people didn't have that aim of doing that. That's one thing that Condor is saying is that he doesn't know that people had that aim. And although we can't know what was going on in their minds, we know that they were told to go to the Capitol. We were told that the certification of the election for Joe Biden, they were told by Donald Trump and others that that certification would be fraudulent. They were told that the election would be stolen and that the country would be stolen from them. So I think we can conclude that it makes a lot of sense to conclude that the people that were there wanted to stop that transfer of power, which is a very
yeah,
serious problem, and the consequences of that could be truly
that's fair, but
disastrous.
I don't think that at the same time we could say just because they wanted to, that they had it in their will to, like, all of these people to go in the Capitol building and just throw the table over. I don't. I think those are two separate things because yeah, okay, I want to see that, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just going to go and protest and have our voice be heard, and then maybe, you know, the goal might have been for people there to say, well, we're going to make Mike Pence think really hard. You know, maybe he'll do something, maybe he'll see us, maybe we'll get visibility. So I don't think a lot of people and I think if they would have wanted to overthrow things, if they really would have thought this out, you know, they had no command and control. There was no command and signal or anything. No coordinate. The only coordination was, I think, the Trump saying go to the Capitol, right? There might have been groups of people on the ground, but I mean, I saw like there's like
That's not
45
what
year old
Don
women.
Jr. That's not what Don Jr. said in his email. He says that they're more than capable of doing it.
Oh, I mean, I don't really listen to him, to be honest. I mean, he's just a dude that says something, you know. That just I have no opinion about that. But you know, I'm talking about the does that I just don't really care about him. He's my son. You can't talk about my son like that. Okay. We're gonna talk about China now. China. We're going to be the best of friends with China. Okay.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Condor, for sharing your view. I do want to go on to the next caller now, so
Thank
we
you.
can. There's a lot of people waiting. And if you'd like to join us as a speaker, you're welcome to do so. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and invite you to do that. Okay. Okay, all right. We're gonna bring in some more callers, and yeah, we're gonna try to move through the callers a little bit quickly now, so more people have a chance to get in their say. All right, Brett, you're on.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna try to not go down too many tangents. While I agree with Condor's last point about the violence overall of violence in society needing to be addressed, and extremes of groups are one of our biggest threats to society, really, because it's one thing to protest, it's another thing where it gets completely out of control and people are killed because of it, businesses destroyed, the government breached, etc. With this one in particular, as incompetent as it was, the fact that it got to the level it did and the rest of the government just looked at Trump like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing riling the group up like to this level? To the fact, and the case in point I make is that Ashley Babbitt, if I know her last name correctly, anyone correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but the fact that she believed that this was stolen and wanted to go protest it to the point to where she then did get to the front of the line there, and I haven't watched the video on it in a long time, but she was killed, obviously. And that might only be a couple of people who died. The other ones being, I read recently, for health-related reasons. The officer, well, obviously the one officer sustaining damages in the fight that day. Even as incompetent as that is, I have to agree with Zoe that it's an important marker that we have to be aware of. In the same way that the violence that the protests, or not the first protests and then riots for portions of the Black Lives Matter movement caused earlier that summer. We can't, but with this one, we can't just say like, oh, it's just the goofy right doing whatever, because we do know that our nation's history has a really violent streak of ethnocentric, I don't want to say right just to the right, but like this nationalism where many cities and states have had, like violent people trying to take over politics. I would want to see, Condor, if you have a link to that resource you were talking about, the incident in Florida, I would love to read over it. But yeah, I think I'll stop there because I don't want to go too much farther.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, with what you're saying, that Trump riled up this group and to just this really insane level of anger and and spurned them on to actions. And then he didn't do anything to stop it that was really sufficient, anywhere nearly sufficient, because he just tweeted some things which was not as far as he could have gone in terms of dialing down the rhetoric. And really in the same and he never really did try to dial down the rhetoric until it had been hours later, because he, even in the middle of while this was going on, he was tweeting about how, I- how vile, how disgusted he was by Mike Pence not doing what he wanted him to do, which would have been illegal, of course. Let's not forget that, right? I mean, just the unfortunate fact that he was lying to everybody about that, but that he was, again, so even though he was telling, he eventually told people to leave. It did take a while for him to reach out and say those things, and he only wanted to say it through Twitter for a long time. And then we have to look at, why did it take him so long to insist on some type of action be done by the National Guard to stop this. So but anyway, it's, as far as, we can't just dismiss what happened as a group of, as some minor event that happened, because those are all this was a serious thing that took place. But as far as, I don't think that the fact that there were a lot of people there, that there were I'm sorry, the fact that this was a fringe group, right? That can be acknowledged. That can and should be acknowledged, that this was
Mm-hmm.
a fringe group of people that were
Yeah.
breaking into the Capitol. And
Yeah.
I don't think that people, I don't think there should be I don't think that conservatives should have any problem coming out and saying, well, those people didn't represent us. That's not what we wanted. And I think that's reasonable to say, hey, we also condemn this violence. The problem is that they're not just doing that. They're going out of their way in so many circumstances to try and say that they have to dismiss this, or to say that, to try and blame, other people for it, other groups, by, by trying to insinuate that this was the fault of X, Y, or Z group, like Antifa or Black Lives Matter or something. And instead of just saying, this was a violent attack and we don't like it, and the people who did it were crazy, whether they were the right on the left, and we should find out what happened and stop it, and we don't think that Trump did enough to stop it. I mean, I think that's a reasonable, rational thing to say. And I don't think that I think that the response to it is what's unfortunate. And I don't think that, and I understand if people feel like the media is portraying all Trump supporters as being crazy people who want to attack the Capitol. And if they feel like they're being portrayed that way, I think that it's fair to say, hey, we shouldn't be portrayed that way. But at the same time, if they're going to act they as though this is something that can be dismissed or ignored, that's not right either. And they are making themselves look very bad by doing that. And unfortunately, they're failing to hold President Trump accountable for his lack of actions that day,
Yeah.
and for his irresponsible rhetoric.
And the wide ends of the spectrum are polarizing people more and more. Social media makes it worse in some regards, because people, only see stuff that, is basically their own resources. And with the, as we said, saying we think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, I think that's true in the sense that, like, we keep not being able to agree on, certain facts. And again, like, you can have a whole bunch of people in the middle who are trying to figure out, healthcare, housing, all these other topics. But then you have the extremes that just keep, society more angry and, not like trying to work on constructive problems. So yeah, but
Yeah, that's a good
definitely,
point.
yeah,
Sorry. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next caller, but you're
yep,
welcome to join us as a speaker, and we can have more of a conversation after we get through a few more speakers here. We'll continue, open it up a little bit more here. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next caller now.
Yeah, I already had my turn. You should go to the next three callers and want to make me a speaker, and I'll just wait.
Okay, I think I'm moving on to the next caller here, and I'm refreshing my page. So let's see. Okay, Jared, are you on now?
Hey Zoe, yeah, thanks. First of all, great job. You're doing an awesome job with this whole conversation. I think it is an important conversation to have.
Thank you, Jared.
I think first of all, obviously January 6th, what this shows us is that the real issue here is Black Lives Matter and Nancy Pelosi and Hunter Biden. Like, it's pretty obvious that's the real issue with January 6th. Like, no, that's ridiculous. The issue is that there was an insurrection. There was a violent mob that was led by the president who was leaving office, and there was nothing done to stop that action. And that action ended up in multiple people dying. There was certainly violence, both during the event and after the event, that was solely caused by Donald Trump and the actions that were taken by those that were at the event on January 6th. So it's not a stretch to draw the lines and the distinctions of who was at fault and what actually occurred on January 6th.
Revolutionized our immunization techniques, required reading at the academy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, in terms of being able to find out who caused the events of that day and who's responsible, some of that is known. So yeah, that
Yeah,
we don't
I think
want
it's
to.
exactly. I think we definitely know, and it's also not. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a deep thing that we have to look into, right? Like, there was a mob that was drawn by an individual, or if not an individual, it was drawn by a party that was disseminating this lie that the election was stolen, right? We can talk about there being these outlier events like ballots that are unsecure, or a dead person voted, right? But that occurs in every election. It probably has occurred in every election, but we have a process. We have the ability to verify that elections are run in a manner that are accurate. And the fact of the matter is, we know that that was true, but there was only one party that kept continuing to say that was not true, that the election was stolen, that this was fake, that there's this big conspiracy against a certain group. And that action had consequence. That consequence was a group of rioters attempting to overthrow our electoral process. Like, you can try to have whataboutisms, or draw these distinctions. Here we're not talking about feelings. The only feelings that we're talking about are the the feelings of those that thought the election was false, right? Like, those feelings are valid, I guess, but they're stemming from misinformation. So I think the whole detachment from reality, and then even further down the road, there being no consequence for these actions for those that were facilitating this lie. Like, It's just making that detachment from reality even worse.
Yeah, I do agree that the fact that there is a pretty big lie behind this is a serious is a very serious problem that can't be dismissed, and that you're right. Just because some ballots were unsecured, as you pointed out, this sort of thing has happened many times through many elections. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't verify the election was accurate, because again, these are corner cases in a lot of ways. And it's not as though there was not a lot of people trying to make sure, a lot of people in these states trying to make sure that we had free and fair elections. They were going out of their way to get the vote counted as accurately as they possibly could. And a lot of these people were also sort of harassed horribly, which is really unfortunate. A lot of the people that were trying to do that.
I want.
So it is true
Can I
that
have a
you're right.
quick
The
question?
consequence of that kind of misinformation by of well the of the lie of saying that the election was of saying that the election was not decided
100%. Yeah.
I want
is a problem, was not decided definitively accurately is a problem. Yes, Nivik.
Yeah, all of people's viewpoint be if the Confederacy overthrew Link, put somebody else that represented them.
You're breaking up a little bit, Nivik. I think I heard you say the word Confederacy.
Can you hear me? Testing. No, I
I
said
heard that.
what would people's perspective be if the Confederacy overthrew the will of the people in taking Lincoln out of office and putting someone else in power?
Yeah, Nivik, that wasn't actually a civil war because the South didn't actually take over and win, right? So, yeah, it's a false premise, false argument. It's like saying that there was not a violent insurrection is placating your own beliefs, and it's just simply not the reality of what happened, right? Like there was an attempted overthrow of our government. There was a purpose, a goal of stopping the vice president from certifying the election. That was the goal of what occurred. So just because it was not effective in accomplishing its goal doesn't mean that it didn't occur. So we know that that
Or
actually
not
occurred.
bloody, or not bloody with
Oh, it's
weapons.
totally bloody. Yeah, people died that day. People died afterwards. I think 6 cops, committed suicide after the fact. Like this was a real
No,
event in the
I was just
history of the
saying
United
hypothetically,
States.
if it, let's say if it was, even if it wasn't, it wouldn't that wouldn't matter in the objective that was being reached of
No, yeah,
overthrowing.
exactly. I don't think it that necessary. I mean, whether or not blood is shed doesn't matter to, like the real question at hand, at least as I understand it, is we're trying to get a sense of how this happened. What exactly led this event to occur, and obviously it's going to be a big systemic issue of media, Facebook, social media, the president, a lot of different factors into it, but that speaks to the fact that we need to investigate this instance. We need to figure out exactly what happens, and also I think deep down we all know what led to this instance occurring, but we need to all say collectively that we don't agree with this, right? Like the fact that there are still members of one party running for office that can't say that that this event was not
Yeah,
the scope is
that's
like it's crazy.
that's why I was asking the viewpoint. What would people have if what if the Confederacy manipulated the political process, took Lincoln out of power, and put somebody else that represented them in power instead? That
Well,
was
Jared, I think you made some great points there, and I would like to invite you to join us as a speaker.
Thank you, Zoe.
And I'm
Appreciate you.
gonna thank you. I'm gonna move on to the next caller so we can make sure everyone gets a chance to call in here. All right, and Cole, you're up.
Hello. I think
Hello.
it was all peaceful and everything on January 5th there was FBI informants trying to rile up the group and stuff. Donald Trump didn't say nothing. He just said, go up to the Capitol and make your voices heard. We had some free letter agencies in there provoking violence and stuff. There were so many YouTubers there reporting it live and stuff. And you can go to stophate.com and get the real story. The media is literally a propaganda machine. So everything that happened that day was because the report of the Capitol having bombs and stuff, they knew it from the night before. They didn't bump up security, so it was planned by the deep state to make Trump look bad. Make all the patriots love this country look bad. Do you understand?
So you don't think that? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you. You don't think that it made Trump look bad in any way? The events that transpired that way, that it shouldn't have made him look bad in any way?
Not at all, because he didn't say nothing to them. They just acted alone. Those groups, there was about 1 million people, and even I saw the videos in the Capitol, and they just watched the Capitol say they didn't tear anything up besides the people that broke the window. They just walked through there like they were invited in by the cops and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Cole, you're making the argument. You think most of those people did not engage in violence?
Correct. Because what the media focus on is the violent people. They don't focus on the other 99% of people that are.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Cole, but the media on the other side does the same about Black Lives Matter, right? I don't see anything wrong with pointing out actual crime. I don't care who's doing it. But I kind of, yeah, as long as you're willing to apply that principle, if it wasn't, a situation where it's only supporting your political advance. I want to see people stop generalizing groups and
And I think the election was stolen on all
you do.
kinds of fronts because the hackers could hack our lesson and stuff like that and flipped other seats like senators and House of Representatives and stuff like that. So, who knows? It probably was not just Trump. It was kind of like how many people got stolen from the correct seat or whose vote got really stolen? Was it the presidency or was it lower seats too?
Mm.
You got to put that in play too.
I think it's fairly common to try to shift blame when you feel a certain way and maybe your intentions aren't necessarily originally with the outcome that eventually comes. But the fact of the matter is the FBI did not make Donald Trump hold a rally saying that the election was stolen. Like, the FBI did not make Donald Trump call for a group of people to go down to the Capitol. Like, those are events that are factual. Did not, there's no conspiracy of the FBI behind that.
Let me ask you this question. What about the white buses busting people in right when Trump was speaking, trying to, about the people in had the face mask ready to go in and stuff? They got bust in. All of Trump, all of the supporters of Trump didn't have face mask or nothing like that. It was.
I think my response to that would be like the metric here is not how many lives were taken on January 6th or
No.
how many shots were fired or how much gas was spilled, right? Like, the metric is what actually occurred and what was the intention of that event, right? Like, there was a clear goal of stopping the electoral process from taking place, and it happened, right? Like, we delayed that process. Luckily, it didn't end it completely, but that's what we're looking at, not what was the tactical gear of the people that were undergoing that action.
No, what I'm trying to say was like our goal was being loud outside, trying to make our voices heard, supporting the VP to making the right decision. And there was the group was so large you can't hardly control 1 million people, so when a couple of people fall out of line.
We're losing you. We're losing your mic there a little bit, Cole. Oh, that's better.
There's like 1 million people there, so it's hard to keep all the people on the same page trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, the people in the back of the line, like who aren't like at the front line, they're not going to necessarily know what's going on. Like, I know that a lot of those people who did like walk in, they thought that like they were treating it like they're okay, fine. The museum was closed today, but okay, you guys put enough pressure, fine, you can come in, just be quick about it. Like that, it seems like there was a lot of people who were like that. Like, it looked like people walking through a museum.
And
what about the people that broke the law, though, Cole? Are you okay with holding them accountable?
I believe nobody broke any laws because it's the people's house, it's the taxpayers' house. So really, we should be nobody.
Like, there wasn't any assault. There wasn't any damaged property.
That's a broken window. That's it.
well, we know that people broke the law, right? Like there have been people convicted of breaking the law. So if that's what you think, then obviously there's something else there that we need to discuss and help you understand, the impact of breaking the law.
Go to tophate.com. They break it down very good. Go to their Telegram group and see what happened, because those people were on the front lines filming every second of it and describing what was happening.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for the website. We will take a look. Zoe, should we move on to the last caller?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Cole. I'm gonna.
Yeah, thanks, Cole.
You're welcome to. Hang around. All right, and let me go ahead and add the next caller here. I'm trying to refresh my screen, but it's not.
If you
doing
make
it
me moderator, Zoe, I can help.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. All right. Now I got mod control. You're all dead. I'm going to monologue. Okay, so I want to go... I want to go this and say, take next caller. There we go.
Jamile, you've been very patiently waiting. Thank you for calling in.
Well, thank you for taking my call. Assuming I was patient and not gesticulating wildly. No, if I'm the last caller, I wanted to close us out with a resounding call to care less about January 6th. I think I can get this in under 2 minutes, if you allow me.
Go ahead.
All right, so awesome. Thank you for your indulgence. It is incredibly obscene that the leader of a major party is just plain lying about who won the election, and it is very dangerous that something like a third or a quarter of people involved in America's political process just don't believe in the integrity of the 2020 election. And there have been a whole bunch of very stupid laws passed by Republican legislators that threaten the future of our elections. And I think we could focus more on those issues. We could focus more on reminding people that Donald Trump is not connected with reality. We could focus more on being passionate about our elections and the fact that we have the safest, most secure democratic machine in history, except for Canada. If we said about what happened on January 6th, hey, there was a massive investigation of everyone who was there by the DC District Court. People who were there were charged with crimes. The judicial branch of government took a look at it, and if they screwed up, the consequences, the legal consequences for people who were there on January 6th, that was their responsibility. That was their screw up. And we can move on. That's a that's the judicial branch, and law enforcement did their thing with as much competence as American law enforcement ever does. Because while we can banish Donald Trump from American electoral politics, and I think we can banish Donald Trump from American electoral politics, and I think we can get some sanity back to our elections. But a lot of people who will go with us in those two things aren't going to want to relitigate January 6th. All right. How'd I do? 2 minutes? 2.5?
Yeah, that was pretty good. That was pretty succinct. So, yeah, thank you very much. So it seems like you see that you agree that January 6th is a problem and that there are a lot of other important problems going on right now, and that it's your view seems to be that we need to be focusing, kind of letting this go and focusing more on other kinds of problems that are happening right now. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think Donald, close enough. Thank you for taking my call, and I'm sorry to wrap it up with something witty like I usually do, but appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
hearing.
Well, I agree. I appreciate your time and I appreciate you coming on. So, yeah, I think he had some, I do think, he had a very left wing view there, and I agree with a lot of it. And I think that we do have a safe and secure democratic machine. I do think that the, I do think that we can, that it would be a good idea to banish Donald Trump from politics, and specifically because of the events of January 6th is a big reason why the events of January 6th, the events leading up to them, and the statements that he's been making about the election system that are undermining the election system are extremely damaging to the company, which is to the country. I said company, to the country. So, getting back to sanity, back to our elections, it was important. I don't think that we can. I'm sorry that he left and he didn't get to hear me say. I do think that. I want to say that I do think it's very important to talk about this. At the same time, I know that I hope that we can get to a point where we don't feel the need to talk about it anymore, because we are past the point where this is an ongoing problem, where the misinformation around this day is an ongoing problem, because I do think that the misinformation continues, and that the justifying and dismissing of this continues, is an ongoing concern, and just not talking about it anymore isn't going to make it go away, because it was that important of an event that happened, and it's important in establishing. It's one of the important events that happened in the time since Donald Trump lost the election, that we can't lose track, that we can't lose sight of, because it shows how deeply incompetent and unqualified he is to be president, and that is very, very serious. So I would like to go ahead and open up the room to anybody that wants to talk at this point.
Hey Zoe,
And I'm going to invite
great
people to be
job.
speakers. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you
And Travis,
saying that.
even when there's disagreements, it's been said and all that. You know, I agree with a lot. You know where I stand on that. I don't think it was as big as a riotous deal, and it was. It was potentially, could have been worse and all that, I guess. But again, they didn't bring their weapons, and I think that means it really wasn't an attempted coup or insurrection. But again, to just branch off to something slightly different, I don't want to repeat myself. What worries me is like the DHS series of memos, among which say that if you're pro-life or pro-choice, if you're pro-BLM or against BLM, if you are saying things against the guy, if you're saying misinformation online, we're coming for you. And so I'm really, really, really hesitant to support. And by the way, as presidents go, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Obama was at least as bad as Bush in terms of the violence and mayhem he created during his presidency, and Trump is a piker compared to either one of them.
I have
Obama for sure.
I have a
Way
question.
worse
I have a question for the room here. Did Donald Trump order people to be violent?
No, but could I throw in 30 more seconds of just briefly?
As long as it's a response to my question.
Oh. No, well, no, it was something that I was going to say already.
All right, so mute. Anyone who wants to answer that question. Did Donald Trump order anyone to be violent?
Outside members of the military, Donald Trump can't order anyone to be violent. Ultimately, we all have the responsibility and freedom to say, no, I'm not going to do what you say. You're Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. So now, does anyone here think that Donald Trump broke any laws?
Well, I guess the ongoing investigations will hopefully let us know. But
I'm saying, like, if you
potentially,
guys had to throw some money on it, like, would you guys bet he did or bet he didn't? Because from what I see, I think he was engaging in some of the same political theater I've seen in the past. I think it's going to be hard to nail him on breaking a specific law. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I think at least myself, I would think that most everyone would agree with that. But I think that's even more reason to look into, the comprehensive nature of the event and to see all of the factors that are at play. Because I think, to your point, there may not be one person who's 100% responsible for the outcome, in that Donald Trump may not have instructed and directed violence, but yes, certainly that group would not have been there had it not been for Donald Trump. The group wouldn't have taken the action that they had taken had it not been for the lies that were told by Donald Trump. So yeah, there may be some responsibility there.
So another question I have too. So feel free to answer that question or the second one. If you also had to make another bet, and I'm just asking you based on the inferences you can make here with what you know, do you think Donald Trump had in his mind that he wanted to see violence at the Capitol building?
No, not at all.
Okay.
He doesn't want everybody to make their voices heard, and no, but he didn't say enter at all. He said to make your voices heard.
Okay. Thanks, Cole. Who agrees or disagrees with Cole?
Michael Wolff has a great point about that in his book, where he talks about the day of talks about January 6th. Like Trump, according to his sources, Trump went out and gave this rousing speech. I'm going to walk with you to the Capitol, storm the Capitol. And then he turned around and started walking back in, and the Secret Service came up to him and were like, "You're going to the Capitol?" And the other person was like, "What are you talking about? No, I'm not going to do that."
Yeah, when he said, "Yeah, I'd like to ask you further there, Jamal. Do you think Donald Trump meant, storm the Capitol? Do you think he meant storm the and I'm talking about Donald Trump in his buffoonish way that he communicates, very relatable to people who have that same style and sense of humor, which I find Donald Trump to be very funny. But so do you think when he said, if he did say that, storm the Capitol, do you think in his mind he meant like go and protest hard, or do you think he actually believed or wanted them to like take the Capitol by force?
Yeah.
Wait, so Nivik, you think that Donald Trump wanted the people to take the Capitol by force?
Yeah.
Okay.
Travis, do you think that had he not wanted them to take it by force, that he would have reacted quicker when it was ongoing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a good question. Like, why the delay? Was it as, and here's something I'd want to know about the history here. Was it consistent with the amount of time we're used to waiting before someone comes out and says something? Like how different was this delay? I guess I would ask.
I think that's a good question, and I think that's like the paint stroke, like the broad stroke that I'm attempting to paint here, is that yes, we can infer that it was longer.
And how long was
mostly because of the phone calls, right? Like there were phone calls,
right.
There were text messages, there were cries out from people even on his party for him to come out and speak. So like that wouldn't have occurred if this were a normal timeline of events and circumstances, right? So we can assume that that was longer than the normal response time based off of that reaction by people on his party.
And do you
The other thing is,
Kevin
not
McCarthy,
just one quick
Donald Trump.
follow up to that, Jared? Do you think Donald Trump could have stopped the mob once it started getting out of control and like break, like they were like, starting to break through barriers and like push back the security personnel? Do you think Trump could have stopped that with his command?
100%.
Okay.
One, because we know they were there only because Donald Trump instructed them to be there. So we know they were there because of
Okay, so he instructed them to be there. Yeah. Go ahead.
We know that they left because he tweeted, right? They were actually circulating his tweet amongst the rioters in the Capitol, and that's why eventually they left. So yes, we know they were there because of him. We know they left because of his tweet that came, X hours later. So yeah, for sure, it's safe to assume that he could have prevented that from occurring.
Do all of you
Storm
agree?
the Capitol, you got to show strength, and you can't show weakness. You're not going to take your country back unless you show strength. So it's that the interpretation of that is like, do what you can to take the country.
Sorry,
Yes.
Sorry, Zoe. I just wanted to throw a couple of those questions out there. I know Brett hasn't had a chance to speak here.
No, thank you for doing that. Those are great questions.
Hey, I got some questions in here, and so there was so many the Tea Party movement was there. Every type of right-wing movement was telling people a different kind of story in their tweets and stuff, and pretty much there was so many organizers and they were not communicating all the way through to all the way down the chain of command, and they are not. So pretty much in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, everything that they did on January 6th was in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. If our government gets too powerful, we can overthrow it.
So you agree there was an attempted coup? All right, cool, yeah.
No, what I'm saying, if we wanted to take it over, we should bring our guns in, but we did not. We just were there to support the confirmation hearing, and there's some bad apples in there that make us all look bad.
Who's we, the Republican Party?
Yeah, there's let me say this. There's bad apples on both sides. Because
there's a lot of bad people there on both sides.
Bad people on both sides.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I think that's a common thing too, right? There were only one group of bad people that stormed the Capitol and led to that event. So yeah, appreciate everyone's time. I'm gonna run, but Zoe and Travis, you guys are always awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jared. Come back for more shows. We're live every day, you guys. New shows every day.
I've been seeing you guys blowing up. It's awesome.
Yep.
See you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jared. Thanks. It was great to hear from you.
Yeah.
David just jumped in here too. David, did you have any comments you wanted to share?
And we also have to hear from Brett as well.
And
Okay, well, yeah.
and also you got listen to this. I think it's a party, like both parties work together at some extent. So we need more, I say, business leaders, more farmers into Congress, more regular people voted into office.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Cole. Brett, I'd like to invite Brett to go ahead and speak now.
Hey y'all, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah.
Cool. First of all, Zoe, thank you for coming up with this topic and bringing it forward, because I think it's a challenging one, but it's one that's necessary to be discussed. And yeah, I kind of just I wonder how we go forward to analyze extremism in political groups and how it, doesn't allow the general population to stay sane and not be, warped to one side or the other. I really, a lot of people had to be convinced that day that that they legitimately believed that the election was. And even though we've talked about the varying degrees on opinions on the violence that day, there was violence that occurred that did not have to occur. Like no one was going to overturn an election that day. Our worst natures just won out, and I wonder how we stop letting the extremes dictate how we can move forward in civil society. That's it.
That's true. The extremism is really ramped up right now, and it is a serious problem, and it's unfortunate that people are have their heels dug in so deeply to their own partisan biases that they can't do something as simple as acknowledge the fact that this event of January 6th was a terrible, very unfortunate event that was, botched and mishandled in various ways by the federal government and by Trump himself, and that Trump played a role it did play a role, I believe, in the incitement of this event, which does not mean to say that I think incitement makes it sound like he was leading the charge or that he specifically orchestrated a coup, which is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, and I think that this has been said very well by a lot of people, is that Trump his rhetoric was unfortunately very of spreading, which his rhetoric, he was spread not only was he spreading lies, but his rhetoric made people feel that they had no choice but to go to the Capitol and to attack and to try and stop this transfer of power, because he was telling them that they could do it. He was telling them that it was legal. He was telling them that the election was illegal, and he was telling them that the consequences of this election not being certified were very severe. And he continued to tell them this very forcefully throughout the day, and to make them feel very just as angry as they possibly could. And he tells them to go to the Capitol and to take action. And I don't think, and I'm not, and even though, I understand how people say this is not the same thing as actually leading a coup. No, it is. I agree with that. It is not the same thing, but it is still very bad and very wrong. And you can't dismiss and ignore and deny the fact that his rhetoric was deeply irresponsible and that he continued to say false, misleading, and insightful things to this crowd of people that day. So I do think that this is an important conversation to have, and I thank you for coming on and sharing your opinion and for listening. And David, I see that you have unmuted now. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I figured it out. I mean, obviously, I think, well, not obviously.
You're a
I mean,
bit quiet there,
yes.
David. I don't know if your mic's turned down or your device is muted.
How about now?
That's a bit better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think Trump absolutely has some responsibility for January 6th. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that he was telling all of his followers to go there and that something big was going to happen. I think there's evidence during a speech when he basically told everybody, "Let's go down and march down to the Capitol." I mean, that's pretty much evidence for that. And I think if you are a Republican and you're looking at the leader of the free world basically telling you that an election has been stolen and pounding that into your brain and using propaganda and misinformation to spread that to you, that you would actually feel justified in helping that president overthrow what you thought was a stolen election or massive corruption in a deep state inside of the government. And if you're taking a universal look at that and you look at all of that and you go, no, that's just Trump failing at every court level to prove that there was any kind of stolen election. But still, even if you watch his speech today at the rally in, where was it, in the Carolinas, he is still throwing that trope out there, even though it has been debunked by judges that he has put on the bench. The fact that the election was stolen, he still throws it out there. He still makes money off of it. It is actually fraud. It should be completely illegal. Will he go to jail for the coup? Probably not. And why I say that is because half of America would probably go into a civil war over it. And so there's probably a calculated effort to maybe not put him behind bars because of that reason. Do I think that the Democrats are going to get smashed in the next election? Absolutely, they are. Do I think the Democrats will lose to Trump the next go around? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think there's only probably 30% of the United States that is completely in a cult for Donald Trump, and so they still won't make it. Will Biden be that person they try to reelect? I don't know. I mean, Biden's disappointed a lot of America. There's a lot of misinformation that Biden is responsible for gas prices, and Americans are so stupid that that's the only thing that they pretty much worry about is their own pocketbook. So yeah, I guess in short, yes, Donald Trump did incite a riot on January 6th. He is hiding 7 hours worth of phone calls about that event, which history will ultimately prove that yes, he did try to overthrow an election. He did. He used lawyers to try to do it. He used people to try to find loopholes, which were ultimately throwing out a bunch of propaganda, misinformation, and fraud, and that should be illegal. And that's all.
Thanks a lot, David.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, David. And I think that we are going to wrap it up for the evening. If anybody has any final thoughts they would like to say, I would like to invite everybody to do that. And then I'd like to invite everybody to continue the conversation tonight and to jump and in our Discord server, and also to remember that we have conversations of this nature going on every day at the Pangburn Philosophy Discord server. So please join us on our Discord and come join us for an after party after this conversation's over. We'll continue to share our thoughts about this, and you can continue to join join the Discord, share thoughts on a variety of subjects every day of the week. So let's go through the room, and if anybody, I'm going to invite some people to be speakers here in case they want to give it, just in case they want to, that are in the callers list here, in case they want to give their point of view. And
one thing
who
quickly,
wants to go first? Brett, I see that you're unmuted. Do you want to go ahead and give some final thoughts?
Yeah, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I would just encourage everyone to swap resources and evidence, facts, documents you see on anything that happens in our society. I think part of the issue that we see right now, if you've watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, is that it's really, you know, we need to get back to using evidence for all of our claims that we make. And I'm not referring to this one in general we're talking about today. I'm just saying as a whole, because it's gotten to the point where, you know, we get online and people are claiming evidence that is, you know, not so much. So that's it.
Thank you for that.
Zoe, I just wanted
Okay.
to
Yeah.
quickly say, everyone, the topic tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time, I will be running a discussion about circumcision and child genital mutilation. So if anyone's interested in that topic, I know we have some hardcore activists in our Discord server, but I just wanted to put that out there, that will be the topic of discussion, a topic I feel very strongly about. So that'll be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So, but Zoe, thank you so much for the
and we've got great conversation. And right, I'm looking forward to that show. And then I think we're gonna have a lot of great shows going on every night of this week.
Yep.
So I'm really excited. I know we're gonna be talking about. I think we're gonna be talking about socialism. I think we're gonna be talking about. I've already forgotten, but I was so excited to hear about it, but I've already forgotten it. So, but there's just a lot of really exciting hot button topics this week. So, everybody, yeah, please follow us, and please follow us, join our Discord, and engage in our conversations and call in. So who wants to speak next to give their final